Alberta Premier Danielle Smith introduced a bill to prevent professional regulators from punishing members for legal, off-duty speech, deeming it the Peterson Law, after citing his case before the College of Psychologists of Ontario as an example of overreach. The government is also invoking the Notwithstanding clause to shield 3 major bills tied to parental rights, gender identity, and women's sports. And at the same time, Smith released a detailed video announcing Alberta's new dual practice model for surgeons, a major shift she says will help cut wait times and keep specialists from leaving the province. Meanwhile, recall campaigns continue to intensify across Alberta, and NDP leader Naheed Nenshi is facing criticism for hiring an American political ad firm to craft his latest campaign messaging. All that and more on this week's episode of the Alberta Roundup. I'm Isaac Lamoureux, and let's hop into that first story right away. So Alberta Premier Danielle Smith introduced the Peterson Law to curb professional regulators who punish members for illegal, off-duty speech, citing Jordan Peterson's case before the College of Psychologists of Ontario as an example of political overreach. She said, quote, "Last year, our government reviewed more than 100 regulated professions to assess whether regulatory bodies were upholding the rights and freedoms of their members. At the time, we indicated that if legislative action was needed, we would take it. And today, we are living up to that promise with what we're calling our Peterson Law." Bill 13, the Regulated Professions Neutrality Act, would prohibit regulators from sanctioning professionals for personal views expressed outside the workplace. Exceptions are narrowly defined, such as the threats of violence, criminal convictions, misuse of professional position, or sexual misconduct. Smith said regulators must stay in the workplace and focus on competence and ethics rather than policing beliefs. The bill was initially foreshadowed last year when Justice Minister Mickey Amery highlighted several national examples of regulatory overreach. These included a Saskatchewan nurse fined $26,000 for criticizing her grandfather's care, a doctor cautioned for objecting to a church's COVID-era communion policy, and Ontario's mandatory statement of principles. He also pointed to the Jordan Peterson case, which of course the government referenced again on Thursday. The Premier said the bill responds to growing concerns that regulators are enforcing ideological conformity. She referenced disciplinary actions taken against professionals across the country, including Peterson, who she said was sanctioned in order to undertake a so-called re-education program in order to maintain his credentials for statements he had made outside of a clinical psychology setting. During the press conference that Smith held at the legislature, she noted that regulated professionals seemingly face no consequences for opposing her government, but said that expressing support for the Alberta UCP was a different story. She said one doctor wrote to the president of the Alberta Medical Association, his union, to express his support for Bill 9, and shortly thereafter he lost hospital privileges and was forced to take a $5,000 course. Smith read the doctor's text, which said, quote, "Almost all of us who have stood have endured this kind of treatment." Another doctor texted her, quote, "I believe the CPSA, College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, is persecuting me for raising concerns with their ideology. I'm now undergoing mentoring that is costing me almost $10,000 in lost revenue." Smith argued that such cases have created an environment where professionals feel unable to challenge prevailing narratives on major issues. She pointed to various examples during the COVID-19 lockdown, citing claims about mask efficacy and incorrect statements that vaccines would prohibit transmission, both of which, she said, were later contradicted. She said various doctors tried to sound the alarm on these kind of issues. Smith said, quote, "I don't fear having a robust discussion where you've got a difference of medical opinion. What I do fear is that there's a narrative that sets in that prevents us from being able to look at science as it evolves, because that's what science is. A thesis, a counter-thesis, and then ultimately, through investigation, we get further and further knowledge. And I believe that by not having that kind of environment, it actually makes us poorer as a society." She cited an even more recent and still developing example, saying that the United States, New Zealand, Sweden, Finland, and the United Kingdom have all taken similar stances as Alberta in banning puberty blockers for children. Amery said the bill also restricts regulators from imposing mandatory cultural, DEI, or ideological training unless it is directly tied to professional competence or ethics. He said, quote, "If there is a push or a drive from a regulator to impose upon its professionals some sort of political, cultural, or social ideology, and it has nothing that relates to the professional competence or ethics of that individual professional, then it will not be permitted to happen in this province." Smith also targeted DEI. She said that it is, quote, "a very highly charged ideological doctrine that teaches a particular perspective about colonialism and white settlement. And you have to ask the question, what are we trying to get to with that? Are we trying to get to a point where we have fairness in hiring and a diversity of people who are hired into positions? Or are we trying to socially engineer some kind of narrative? She further explained that her government was interested in removing any barriers to merit-based hiring. Amory said it was time for regulators to get back to their purpose, regulating professional ethics, competence, and ensuring that doctors are good doctors and lawyers are good lawyers. Nothing extra. But sticking with justice for our next story, we'll look at the Notwithstanding clause. This week, Premier Danielle Smith took what she called one of the most consequential actions of her government, invoking the Notwithstanding clause to protect 3 major bills tied to parental rights, gender policies, and women's sports. Bill 9, the Protecting Alberta's Children Statutes Amendment Act, applies the Notwithstanding clause of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Alberta Bill of Rights, and the Alberta Human Rights Act to various pieces of legislation. The Notwithstanding clause is Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It reads, quote, Section 33 allows Parliament or the legislature of a province to derogate from certain sections of the Charter, namely Section 2, Fundamental Freedoms, Section 7 to 14, Legal Rights, and Section 15, Equality Rights. It does not apply to democratic rights, Section 3, the right to vote, or Section 4 and 5, the sitting of the House of Commons or other Canadian legislatures, mobility rights, Section 6, or language rights, Sections 16 to 23. The clause will be applied to Bill 26, the Health Statute Amendment Act, Bill 27, the Education Amendment Act, and Bill 29, the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act. These bills restrict gender reassignment surgery for minors and prohibit puberty blockers and hormone treatments for those younger than 16 years old. They also require parental consent for children under 16 to change their pronouns or names at school for gender identity reasons. Furthermore, parents must give permission for teaching on gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. One bill also requires governing bodies for amateur competitive sports to ensure that female leagues are free from intrusion by biological males. Premier Danielle Smith said the legislation responds to 3 active lawsuits and an injunction blocking part of last year's Health Statute Amendment Act. She said, quote, this government does not turn to the Notwithstanding clause unless the stakes warrant it, and in this case, the stakes could not be higher. As for the timing, the government explained that the 3 challenges before the courts could take years to resolve after appeals. Smith said, quote, these delays are not acceptable to this government when children are in harm's way. She also had a message that she shared for young Albertans navigating their identity. She said, quote, you deserve dignity, understanding, and support. We will never stop working to keep you safe. You belong in Alberta. We firmly believe that. We also believe it's our duty to protect you. This legislation is about your future, so when the time comes, you have every opportunity to make the adult decisions that are rightfully yours and yours alone. Justice Minister Mickey Amory confirmed he expects the clause will halt ongoing court challenges. He said he's been steadfast in saying his government would use every legal and constitutional tool available to protect the well-being of young people. Smith and Amory both explained why the Notwithstanding clause exists, with Smith calling Bill 9, quote, one of the most consequential actions our government will take during our time in office. The Premier explained that the Notwithstanding clause exists to balance the power between courts and the democratically elected government. She added that when courts behave irresponsibly, they should expect legislators to respond appropriately, such as through the Notwithstanding clause. Smith pointed to the recent Supreme Court decision striking down mandatory minimum sentences for child porn possession as an example. She said, quote, what we're observing is rather than deal with the cases at hand, and in that case, to horrendous pedophiles with graphic, awful images of children, the court decided to pluck a hypothetical case out of the air in order to strike down mandatory sentencing. So I would say that the court should begin to expect that if they're going to make decisions like that, they're going to see more legislatures take the action that we did. Smith added that that decision was 5-4, meaning even the court wasn't in full agreement. Amory said, quote, the Notwithstanding clause is, and why, it's a tool that elected legislatures use. The Notwithstanding clause is integral to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and is a vital provincial constitutional right. It's intended to preserve the ability of elected legislatures to make final policy choices in the interests of the public. We've heard from Albertans, and they expect us to deliver on our mandate to protect young people, and their families will not apologize for putting our children first. The Notwithstanding clause has a 5-year limit that can be renewed. The provisions in the Alberta Bill of Rights and the Alberta Human Rights Act do not expire. But for our next story, we'll transition from justice to health. Alberta's biggest healthcare announcement of the year came directly from the Premier, who released a 6-minute video outlining what she calls the dual practice model, an overhaul designed to cut wait times and stop surgeons from leaving the province. While I encourage you to watch the video in its entirety on Smith's X page, I'll take you through some of the key points now. Smith began by focusing on the real human cost. She said, quote, "Waiting for a needed surgery is a painful and often frustrating experience. These are our loved ones, and they need care far faster than they get it now. And make no mistake, this problem is not just found in Alberta. It's as bad or worse in every province across Canada." She said more than 80,000 Albertans are currently waiting for elective surgery and nearly 35,000 are waiting longer than clinically recommended. This is despite the province doing a record 318,000 surgeries last year and ranking second in Canada for hip and knee replacement wait times. Smith then explained the core problem. Surgeons max out their publicly funded operating times. She said, quote, "Let's say our public health system only has enough funding to perform 10,000 knee replacement surgeries in a year, but the wait list is over 20,000. Once the surgeons have performed those 10,000 publicly funded surgeries, they can't perform anymore, leaving 10,000 people still on the wait list and well-trained surgeons not performing as many surgeries as they otherwise could." So a question that might come to mind is, why doesn't the province just spend more? Smith said that's been tried for decades nationwide and that over 40% of the province's budget is on healthcare spending. So she said spending more money simply is not working. She said healthcare systems in France, Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, Australia, Switzerland, and more have figured it out, and it's time for Alberta to get on board. So with the new dual practice model, where surgeons will commit to a minimum amount or ratio of publicly funded surgeries each year to qualify, here's how Smith described the model. Surgeons can perform both publicly funded and private pay surgeries. Private surgeries can occur after hours or on weekends. Surgeons must commit to a minimum ratio of public surgeries. No public dollars can subsidize private procedures. Cancer and emergency surgeries must remain fully public, and the public healthcare guarantee will stay fully in force. She explained that if a surgeon was limited to 1,000 surgeries in a year due to funding constraints, they could perform 200 or 300 more for patients who can afford the surgeries or have insurance plans that cover the cost. She said everyone would benefit from this system, explaining that those who are able and willing can pay for their surgery and come off the wait list with no cost to taxpayers. Smith said, quote, "That means everyone on the wait list moves up in the queue, so that they also get their publicly insured surgery done quicker than they otherwise would. And surgeons and other specialists remain in the public system, but are happier because they get to perform more surgeries should they want to, which in turn leads to fewer of these doctors leaving Alberta and attracting back others who have previously left for better opportunities elsewhere." And again, she emphasized that the UCP public health guarantee would remain fully in force, promising that nobody will ever be forced to pay out of pocket for a necessary surgery and that everything currently covered by Alberta health insurance will remain so. She said that the main change will be that you will likely get public surgery faster than you do now. She concluded by saying, quote, "It's time to follow the lead of other high-performing health systems in Western Europe and Japan and build a modern, innovative, and 21st century health system that attracts and retains the best doctors working in the best facilities on earth. Because healthcare shouldn't be about blind and outdated ideologies or politics. It should be about providing all Albertans with access to the best healthcare possible when and where they need it. And that's exactly what Alberta's government is going to do." The NDP has run a hit ad campaign on this, calling it US-style healthcare, but I'll just say watch the video and look at what's in it yourself and make the decision, because it's more European style than US. But for our next story, we'll move over to the recall operation targeting the Alberta UCP government. Around 24 UCP MLAs are now facing recall campaigns, or the threat of them, across Alberta in what the Premier calls a coordinated effort to overthrow the government. When I wrote the article earlier this week, Operation Total Recall listed 24 MLAs currently in some stage of recall activity, which has now fallen to 23. 2 petitions are already in the signature gathering phase. Additionally, 10 MLAs are listed as initial paperwork approved, 5 as initial paperwork submitted, 5, including the Premier, are listed as targeted, and 1 MLA's recall status is listed as organizing. The group describes itself as a hub for information and tools rather than a campaign organizer, stating on its homepage that it supports citizen-led efforts. However, the group says it is specifically targeting the 44 Alberta United Conservative Party MLAs who supported using the Notwithstanding clause to send teachers back to work. During question period, NDP leader Naheed Nenshi said that 1/3 of the UCP caucus is under threat of recall, accusing Smith of turning against a process she once supported. Smith fired back, saying that other jurisdictions have highlighted the legislation's intent. to remove elected officials derelict in their duties. She said, quote, "It was not intended to have unions weaponize it to bus people in and put GoFundMes online in order to be able to topple the sitting government. That's what elections are for." Recall organizers are already collecting signatures against Education Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides in Calgary-Bow and Airdrie East MLA Angela Pitt. For both ridings, the signature targets are based on Election Alberta's new 60% rule for recall petitions. Nicolaides' recall petition was approved on October 14th. He submitted a statement in response on October 21st, and the petition was issued on October 23rd. Signatures can be collected until January 21st, 2026. Pitt's was approved on October 22nd. She did not offer a statement within the week thereafter, and the petition was issued on November 5th. Signatures can be collected for her until February 3rd, 2026. Thanks to recent changes implemented by the Alberta government, the Recall Act now requires that petitions be signed by 60% of votes cast in the district's most recent election, up from the formerly required 40% of all registered electors. Nicolaides' recall petition will require 16,006 verified signatures, while Pitt's will need 14,813. Elections Alberta stresses that all signatures must be collected using official forms and witnessed by registered canvassers. Only original physical signatures are valid, and digital or online signatures will not be accepted. Signatories must also have lived in the electoral district for at least 3 months before signing, legibly print their name, address, and contact information, and sign only once. The rules also require canvassers to live in the riding and swear affidavits confirming signatories were eligible electors. Every signature must be witnessed by a canvasser. These efforts are the first major test of Alberta's overhauled recall regime. If any recall petition reaches the 60% signature mark and survives verification, the Lieutenant Governor and Council will order a recall vote within 4 months. If more than 50% of electors who vote on the recall question say an MLA should be recalled, they will lose their job and a by-election will be held. For our last story today, we'll look at a controversial decision from Nenshi, because Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi is facing backlash after the CBC revealed that his newest political ad was produced by a Democratic consulting agency based in New York. The firm, Fight Agency, was created in January 2025 and staffed by senior Democratic strategists. The agency has previously crafted ads for U.S. politicians including Bernie Sanders, Zoran Mamdani, and a lengthy list of U.S. Democrats. The firm says it helps candidates ready to fight the toughest battles in politics and promises sharp messaging and the next great iconic ad. But after Nenshi released the video and this was revealed, he was subject to a lot of criticism online. For example, former Conservative candidate Saeed Ahmed said, quote, "Unbelievable. Naheed Nenshi just hired an American ad agency for his image makeover, spending our Canadian dollars in the US. What happened to elbows up? Buy Canadian? Pure hypocrisy. If the Conservatives did this, the media would explode. Absolutely double standards." Another user criticized the agency's U.S. political ties. He said, quote, "The CBC caught NDP Naheed Nenshi spending Canadian dollars in the U.S. for his big image makeover. Which firm did he choose? The ad agency was Socialist New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani. What happened to Buy Canadian? Elbows up." A third user pointed to Nenshi's staffing choices. He said, quote, "Nenshi hired the same ad agency that Mamdani used. In America, his chief of staff, the driving force behind this new ad campaign, was chief of staff to Liberal ministers Mark Miller and Edmonton's Amarjeet Sohi. If Conservatives did this, there would be a meltdown of epic proportions. What happened to we don't need American-style politics in this country? The hypocrisy." Fight Agency's team includes consultants who have run Senate battleground media operations, Democratic war rooms, presidential primary ad programs, and national communication strategies for U.S. political organizations such as Planned Parenthood. Several partners have won national awards for democratic advertising and have led multi-million-dollar campaigns across the United States. The agency has also run hit ads against U.S. President Donald Trump. But that wraps up this week's Alberta Roundup. My name's Isaac Lamoureux. Have a great weekend. Thank you, and God bless.